This week, a serious flashpoint emerged on NATO's eastern flank. Estonia reported that 3 Russian MiG-31 fighters crossed into its airspace over the Baltic Sea, remaining inside for roughly 12 minutes without clearance. For Tallinn, this wasn't an isolated mistake. It's the latest in a pattern of deliberate incursions, testing both Estonia's defenses and NATO's resolve. In response, Estonia has taken the rare step of invoking Article 4 of the NATO Treaty. This article isn't about automatic defense, like Article 5, but it requires all member states to meet, consult, and address threats to the security of any ally. It's a political alarm bell, and right now, it's ringing loudly across Europe. The significance is hard to overstate. Russian airspace violations are not new, but this one, deeper and longer than usual, signals Moscow's willingness to push the line. Even with NATO aircraft monitoring the region constantly, it sends a message. Russia is probing, watching how far it can go before the alliance reacts. For NATO, this creates pressure to respond with visible unity, perhaps through more air patrols, greater forward deployments, or accelerated defense integration. The Baltic states, already on edge since the war in Ukraine, view every violation as a rehearsal for something larger. And for Russia, it's a low-cost tool of intimidation, a way to unsettle its neighbors, stretch NATO resources, and remind the West that Moscow still holds levers of escalation beyond Ukraine. The question now is not just how NATO responds in meetings, but whether it can maintain deterrence in practice, showing that its borders are not open to challenge. On Europe's northeastern edge, the standoff is becoming sharper, and every minute a Russian jet lingers uninvited in Baltic skies, the risk of a wider confrontation grows. The United Kingdom has announced a new deployment of its Typhoon fighter jets to Poland, joining NATO's Eastern Sentry mission. Their task, air defense patrols across Eastern Europe. This move comes after a troubling pattern of Russian drone incursions into Polish and Romanian airspace. While none of the drones struck targets inside NATO territory, the violations themselves are clear. Moscow is probing the perimeter, testing how quickly and how forcefully the alliance reacts. For NATO, this is more than just a defensive patrol. It's a signal, both to Russia and to the populations of Eastern Europe, that the alliance takes every violation seriously. By rotating forces from the UK and other allies, NATO demonstrates unity and readiness, showing that its borders are not negotiable. But there's a deeper game at play. Each drone that crosses into NATO territory forces a response, scrambles jets, consumes resources, and builds tension. For Russia, these low-cost provocations are a way to stretch NATO thin and keep pressure constant without triggering open conflict. For Europe, the lesson is urgent. Air defense isn't just about missiles and fighters anymore. It's about constant vigilance against drones, hybrid tactics, and gray zone pressure. The Eastern Sentry patrols are deterrent measures, but they're also a reminder. NATO's eastern flank is where Moscow tests the credibility of the alliance itself. And credibility, in geopolitics, is everything. If borders can be violated without consequence, the deterrent begins to erode. If every incursion is met with discipline and unity, the message is unmistakable. NATO will hold the line. On the skies over Poland, Typhoon fighters now carry that message. Not just for Moscow, but for all of Europe watching closely. France has been rocked this week by a new wave of strikes and protests, the largest in months, over government budget cuts and austerity measures. Across Paris, Marseille, Lyon, and dozens of other cities, more than 280,000 people took to the streets. Transport systems slowed to a crawl, schools shut their doors, pharmacies closed, and public services ground to a halt. What began as demonstrations against spending cuts quickly grew into a broader expression of social unrest. Police responded with a heavy presence, and by day's end, over 140 arrests had been made. The images of blocked roads, burning debris, and clashing protesters echo the familiar pattern of French resistance to economic reform. But this time, the stakes are even higher, because this isn't just about France's domestic policy. France is a cornerstone of the European Union, a nuclear power, and a leading NATO member. Social unrest on this scale threatens to weaken its ability to project stability abroad. With migration pressures rising, inflation still biting, and energy costs volatile, a distracted France could struggle to maintain leadership within the EU and commitment to European security initiatives. For Europe, the timing is critical. Russian provocations in the east demand cohesion. US politics are uncertain. And in the middle of it all, one of Europe's most important players is now consumed by protests at home. The question is whether these demonstrations are the crest of a passing wave or the early signs of a deeper fracture within French society. If the unrest escalates, it won't just be Paris that feels the impact. The ripple effects could weaken Europe's collective stance at a moment when unity is most urgently needed. France's streets have long been arenas of protest, but today they are also a test of Europe's resilience. A major new alliance has been forged in the heart of Asia and the Middle East. On September 17th, Saudi Arabia and Pakistan signed a strategic mutual defense agreement. The terms are clear. Any act of aggression against one will be treated as an attack on both. In effect, Riyadh and Islamabad have bound their security futures together. For Saudi Arabia, this pact extends its defense perimeter beyond the Gulf and into South Asia. For Pakistan, it cements its role as more than just a nuclear power on India's border. It becomes a direct security partner for the Arab world's wealthiest state. The timing is crucial. The U.S. role as the traditional guarantor of Gulf security is increasingly uncertain. Washington's shifting focus toward the Indo-Pacific has left space for regional players to take matters into their own hands. This pact can be read as Riyadh signaling it won't wait for America to decide its priorities. But the implications ripple far wider. India will read this agreement as a direct strengthening of Pakistan's strategic depth, now backed by Saudi financial and political weight. Iran will see it as a Sunni bloc consolidating against its influence. And China, already deeply invested in Pakistan, may find new opportunities to extend its reach into the Gulf through this alignment. What emerges is a more complex map, where South Asia's rivalries bleed directly into Middle Eastern security. With oil routes, nuclear capability, and great power competition all in the mix, this isn't just a bilateral pact. It's a sign that the balance of power in two regions may be shifting, and fast. For the United States and its Western allies, the message is sobering. Their monopoly as security providers in the Gulf is fading. New alignments are taking shape, and this one could reshape the strategic chessboard from the Arabian Peninsula to the Himalayas. From September 12th to the 16th, Russia and Belarus held their annual joint military drill, Zapad 2025. Though this year's exercise was smaller in scale compared to some earlier versions, it drew close attention across Europe. The war in Ukraine has turned even routine maneuvers into signals of intent, and Zapad is anything but routine. The exercise showcased coordination between Russian and Belarusian forces, rehearsing scenarios that range from defending borders to conducting large-scale offensive operations. While the Kremlin describes these drills as defensive, NATO states view them differently, as rehearsals for escalation and as pressure points against Europe's eastern flank. Two new details made Zapad 2025 stand out. India participated directly, underscoring its balancing act between Moscow and the West, and Pakistan, a traditional partner of China, observed, signaling how far Russia's outreach in South Asia has expanded. The presence of these two rivals adds an extra layer of geopolitical complexity. Why does it matter? Because exercises like Zapad are about more than tactics. They are about signaling. Moscow wants to show readiness, despite the heavy toll of the war in Ukraine. Belarus wants to reinforce its role as Russia's forward base in Europe, and both want NATO to feel the pressure of constant military activity right at its borders. For Europe, every tank movement, every air sortie, every coordination drill is studied carefully. The size of the exercise may have been reduced, but the message remains the same. Russia is not backing down, and it is reminding the West that its military footprint still stretches beyond Ukraine. In a time when deterrence and perception shape outcomes as much as actual battles, Zapad 2025 is Moscow's reminder that the game is still being played on multiple fronts. In Doha this week, the Arab League and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation convened an extraordinary summit, a direct response to the Israeli airstrike on Qatari territory. The summit brought together leaders from across the Arab and Islamic world, united in sharp condemnation of Israel's action. The message was clear: targeting Qatar, home to major U.S. bases and a hub for Gulf diplomacy, crossed a line. But the discussions went beyond condemnation. Delegates raised deep concerns over U.S. reliability as a security partner. Washington's muted response to the strike has fueled doubts in the Gulf, doubts about whether America will remain the region's ultimate guarantor. As a result, the summit explored alternative defense and diplomatic pathways. Talk of closer coordination with Turkey, deeper energy and trade ties with China, and even renewed emphasis on intra-Arab security cooperation all surfaced in Doha. Why does it matter? Because this meeting wasn't just about Israel and Qatar. It was about the future alignment of the Middle East. If Arab states lose confidence in Washington, they may diversify partnerships, shifting toward a multipolar order where U.S. influence is no longer unrivaled. It also complicates normalization efforts with Israel. Some Gulf states had been cautiously building ties with Tel Aviv under the Abraham Accords framework. Now, with Israeli strikes hitting a fellow Gulf nation, those efforts could stall or even reverse. The Doha summit shows a region recalibrating in real time, condemning Israel's overreach, questioning U.S. credibility, and weighing new alliances. For the Gulf, it's a moment of reckoning, one that could reshape the security architecture of the Middle East for years to come. Stay informed on the world's shifting power. Subscribe to the Watchtower Report, where strategy meets reality.